The Center for Stop Six Heritage, it is in a sense, is modeled after Box City. Do we have anyone who's familiar with Box City? I can't quite see, but if you're not familiar with it, Box City has been implemented across this country. What they've done is allowed high school, well, students, not necessarily high school, but elementary, middle school, and high school young people to get involved in building their school and then figuring out how the school relates to the neighborhood and also to the city as a whole. And it's a learning experience where they use writing, they use the mathematics in order to lay out their community and all of that. So this overall concept is built after that. What we want to do is to start off with two parts to this overall presentation. The first is the Center for Stop Six Heritage, and then the other is the actual history of the Stop Six community. And if you bear with me as I turn pages. First of all, we'll deal with the Center for Stop Six Heritage because we feel that that's of critical importance in order to start with the center, and this is the vehicle that we'll use in order to start shaping and moving the community forward. The Stop Six community is the first thing that you need to understand is the Stop Six community was the sixth stop on the interurban line coming from downtown Fort Worth to Dallas. The sixth stop was located at Hughes and the Union Pacific Rail line north of East Rosedale. And we have gone through a lot of people talking about Stop Haynes, Stop Six, etc. But we needed to tie it down, and we were able to do that. According to one of the older residents that lived in the area, Alexander Howard. The black citizens of Cowanville settlement would get off the train and walk to the black community, and the community later became known as the Stop Six community. The Center for Stop Six location, we have talked about it being the sixth stop, and sixth stop, it was located, the center is located in the teacher Rosenwald building on the Paul Lawrence Dunbar Young Men's Leadership Academy campus. The building was constructed on the campus in 1924, 1925, and the building was the first permanent location for the community, for the school. The building, let's see, the building was one of over 5,000 schools built across the South, partially funded by the Rosenwald Foundation for the Education of Negro Children. Mr. Rosenwald was actually the chairman of the board of Sears and Roebuck, and he had a real concern about the education of African American children in the South. And he teamed up with Booker T. Washington, Tuskegee Institute, and they came up with a state-of-the-art design for schools, rural schools, lighting, ventilation, color, etc. And they were actually classified as by the number of teachers that the building would accommodate. The Rosenwald building on the Dunbar's Young Men's Leadership Academy is probably one of the, it was the only one in Tarrant County, and it was also probably one of the few Rosenwald building that's on an active school campus, and the building is used quite heavily within the community. The building is potentially eligible also for the National Register designation. The purpose of the Center for Stop Six Heritage is to establish a center in the Stop 6 neighborhood where oral, pictorial, written history of the people, places, and events of the community can be collected. The collected history is made available to the students, adults, to create a better understanding of the history and importance of the Stop 6 community. The driving forces, and I think this is one of the things that a lot of people don't understand. They thought that we were just opening up a museum because that was kind of an interesting thing to do. But it's not the reason we did it. The driving forces behind the Center for Stop 6 Heritage is for the children, the teachers, and the community. And it is kind of simple because it gets all involved in motivating and shaping a community by encouraging students to be top performing youngsters. And it's a known thing that children who know the history of their community tend to perform better in school. But even more important than that is teachers who know the history of community they teach in tend to respond and set higher standards for their students. Because so many teachers who teach within various communities drive in the morning, they drive out in the afternoon. They know nothing about the community. The only thing they know about is the school. So we want to change the focus on that and provide an environment where they can find out what the community is around that school and gain some respect for the children and the community. And it's been known even with Box City, when they went through this overall process, teachers started coming back outside of school hours to find out and explore more things about the community. But even more important in developing a community is communities who know, the people who live in communities who know the history of the people, the events, places within the community tend to have more pride and ownership of a community. And that's one of the things that we were using this overall concept of developing a museum there as kind of an initial base of redevelopment of that Stop 6 community and creating a better image. And that's one of the things we've been thoroughly working on, and it looks like it's working well. And there's a lot more pride in the community, and people know a little bit more about the area. There's some basic components of the center itself, and it was information. And one of the things we wanted to do is to collect pictures, documents, manuscripts, history, and other written materials. Some of the things that we've accomplished through this overall process is the center has collected a significant amount of family history, photographs, special collections, and manuscripts on Stop 6. And fortunately, a lot of the information that we have collected is material that you won't find anywhere else. It's very valuable material and probably more valuable than a lot of people who come into the center and don't realize exactly what we actually have accomplished in that area. The center was created in order to provide an opportunity for local school students, and this is not just at the Young Men's Leadership Academy. This is being created for the Dunbar Pyramid. So there's elementary, middle school, and the high schools that's in the area, and this is available to them. And what we wanted to do is have the students, along with other individuals in the community, to get involved with us in doing research and documentation of the actual facts. You hear a lot of things, but we need to be sure that the facts and material that we're using is correct. And so we're continuing to do that. And the center has been involved in some of the accomplishments under this component. We have been documenting information on the Stop 6 community. This process has involved students, individuals, and community, and institutions from the city and from the county. The oral history piece, and this has become very important because you hear a whole lot of things and we're just not sure how accurate a lot of that is. But we can only be sure by tapping some of the older residents within the community and trying to glean information from them. Some of the accomplishments is the center has conducted several oral history sessions with many of the older residents of the Stop 6 community. These sessions have led to sharing of other information outside of the information that we got through the oral history section. Many people have gone back and done documentation and turned that information over to us. So it's been very important in developing the center itself. The library, and that's the other piece of it, is that we're still collecting materials, documents, and other items and storing those. One of the biggest challenges right now, we're collecting so much information that we're going to have to be sure that we have persons working with us in order to help organize and make that information available to people within the community. The museum itself, and that's what most people look at because they look at what do you have on display. And we have been working real diligently in order to pull that together, but we've been looking very simplistic. How do you do a good museum presentation without investing a whole lot of money within the exhibit itself? And so we've been working on that. And some of the accomplishments here is the center has developed a permanent exhibit on the earlier white settlers, black settlers, the first churches for blacks, the schools for blacks, black elected official from the Stop 6 neighborhood. And one of the things that we are real proud of when you go into the black elected official room at the Heritage Center, you'll discover that the majority of the first black elected officials in Tarrant County came from the Stop 6 community. And we think that that's of real great importance. We have, under this overall process, we've elected individuals from the Stop 6 community who grew up or still live in the Stop 6 community that have made major contributions. We have worked very diligently on the Amanda Davis file, and she was one of the first. She was supposedly the first black settler in the Stop 6 community. We've developed information on the first black settlers within the area. We've recognized some of the other pioneer professionals that have come from the Stop 6 community, and it's really important for our students to come in and be able to actually see who's coming from the community, because a lot of people, we worked with one young man, for example, with the middle school, and he was talking about, we were talking about the Stop 6 community, and we also started talking about people within his family. And he said, you know, I've heard my parents talk about those individuals, but I didn't realize they were that important. And you know, and this is kind of tragic because the kids are in an environment where all of this information is available, but no one has actually sat down and said that your grandfather or your great-grandfather was really important in setting up this overall community. And so it was a real turning point for him. I'm getting excited about talking, so you have to excuse me. The 6 components and workshops and seminars, and we've done a significant number of workshops and seminars through the center. Some of the accomplishments is the center has conducted many workshops for the community and students at Dunbar. And this is not only, the museum is not necessarily for us to provide something just to the adults, but we're getting in with the students itself and working with them to get good information to them. One of the things and that we're proud of, and I just saw, well, Clifford Davis came in with us, and we did a exhibit on Judge Davis. We had a room set aside where we allowed him to come in and set up. We had the honor of having him to share some of the many accomplishments that he has done in plaques and other documents, and we set that up in a room. And so he was able to present that, and he was able to make that information available to friends and all of that. But Judge Davis also, while that exhibit was up, was able to meet with right at 300 young people, various classes, and do lectures and discussions with them. And that became very important because this was a person from their community that had accomplished something quite significant, and he was able to come in and actually sit down and work with them. And so the museum served a significant piece for him. Okay. Some of the things that we had all of these concepts about what we were going to do with the museum itself. But one of the things that we had to stretch, and we started reading about the Rosenwald schools. And the Rosenwald schools were generally some of the largest buildings within a community. So not only did they provide a place to educate their children, but the Rosenwald buildings, because of their size, also provided a meeting place for the community. And we said, well, you know, what we ought to do is look at piggybacking on that overall concept and making the facility available, the galleries that we have, to make those available for meetings. And that's what we did. And one of the first groups that we got was a group of young men that started meeting there every Wednesday night, and they started looking at what can we do, how can we get involved, and we've developed now a group of young men that call Community Frontline, that's getting involved not only in cleaning up the community, working with the schools, getting involved with things within the community and seeing how they can plug into the overall process. But now they meet roughly about twice a month in the building. But they're doing things within the community. We've also been able to get the Dunbar Alumni Association involved in meeting there, having their meetings there, and then the various graduating groups from Dunbar High School, they have their meetings there. We have family reunions that was held there, birthdays, and special events that we're doing in the Heritage Center. So it's actually doing more than just being just a center where we have exhibit material. The community, we've done some other kind of interesting things also. We keep talking about we want teachers to understand the community, and we've had some principals that have actually brought all of their teachers and had the teacher orientation there at the Heritage Center. And then they've had various contact tests about seeing if the teachers can actually find information by looking at the exhibit to determine some of the historical facts of the Stop Six community, and we found that very beneficial. Some of the other things that have happened, we're involved, and we passed out a handout on some of the other things that we've done through the Heritage Center. We have provided on an annual basis with Dunbar High School and some of the other schools in the area tours for their new faculty, so that their new faculty could find out a little bit more about the area. The Stop Six community sits on Arlington Lake, and we've had teachers that have taught at Dunbar High School for years and didn't realize that a lake was in walking distance. And so that gets back to the fact that you don't know the community. We have provided a lot of information for the community who wanted to verify facts. The center has held special events for students and faculty in the Dunbar Pyramid, because many of the principals and teachers want to find something different in order to have special awards programs and things of that nature for their students. And rather doing it there at the schools, they'll bring it over and do it at the Heritage Center. We've had special exhibits and presentation, because at one time we had a special room that we were able to do major exhibits. We don't have that anymore because the school is using that for the Dunbar initiative. But this was where we had an exhibit for Christine Moss, the Fort Worth ISD board member, Judge Clifford Davis, I mentioned him, Reby Carey, who was the first school board member. So we've had functions like that. One of the things that I think is very important, that the Heritage Center itself has always been kind of a centerpiece in a redevelopment plan for that Stop Six community. And also it was a centerpiece in improving the overall view of people of that community, rather than saying everything about Stop Six is negative, but it's not. There's a lot of positive things. And so we've been able to use that as a center point in that overall process. But I think the other thing that we'd like to share with you, and when we start talking about the Stop Six area, is what is the history of the Stop Six community. And we know that it is the sixth stop, that it's located, we've talked about it being the sixth stop on the interurban, and there at Hughes Street, just north of East Rosedale. But the location is significant, because when you talk about black history, a lot of people want to assume that in a black community that we're talking about a community that has always been a black community, and that's not the case for Stop Six. And we thought that it was of critical importance to start looking at the whole history of the Stop Six community. And the original land surveys of the George W. Conwright and the Dan Delaney Tarrant County abstracted number 291 and 411 of 360 acres each formed the heart of the early Cowanville community, and where the two areas, abstracts, came together was Amanda Street. And so Amanda Street was the key area where a lot of things took place. Today this area is bounded by East Rosedale, Stallcut, Ramey, and on the western side it's Miller Street maybe. We haven't really tied that boundary down. there were initially in those two areas, there were two major white settlers. In the 1880 census, Jack Willie, W-I-L-L-I. And when you talk about the Stop 6 area, they say W-I-L-L-I-E, but according to the information that we pulled, that's how you spell that name. And he was a farmer and a native of Switzerland, and he owned all of the Dan Delaney survey. And his wife Betty Willie was 33 years old at the time in 1880, and was a housekeeper who was a native of Alabama. They had five living children with them, and one son who lived nearby. And his daughter married a gentleman named Stallcut, and they went through the process of he kind of took over operations for Jack Willie. And then B.D. Chappelle owned approximately 100 acres of the G. Conrad survey, track 1 and 2. And they were the ones that basically started the overall operations. There was one of the things that's kind of interesting is that when you start looking at the Stop 6 community, in most communities, you start looking at what are the factors that brought people to that location, and then how do they fit into the overall redevelopment of that area. And if you don't look at that, and if you don't get a good feel for why the community started and how it grew, then it's very difficult to return the pride back to the community, because you don't have anything to hold on to. But Wash Ward was one of the people that was involved in the development of the Stop 6 community. Wash owned 115 acres in the M.T. Johnson survey, which was located on the Arlington side of, well, actually it's located where the lake is right now, because when they built the lake, they pretty much covered his property with water. But he owned 115 acres, and he bought that in October the 23rd, 1875. And he is kind of key because the original churches and schools kind of came under him and through him. Amanda Davis, she was the first black property owner in the Cowansville community, and she acquired tract 11 of which was 1 acre of the G.W. Conrad survey, and she bought it for $45 in July 1896. Now, the interesting thing about this is that she was married at the time, but she bought the land. And that's kind of unusual for that time, but she did buy the land, and she had basically a significant number of children. She had, the oldest child was a Howard. The next child that she had was Sanders, and that was actually Bob Ray Sanders. And many of you know Bob Ray, but that was she was his grandmother, or great-grandmother, I believe. And there were some other very interesting things about Amanda Davis, and we may have time to talk about that. The Alonzo and Sarah Cowan were the second black family to buy land in the Stop 6 area, and they bought basically 3 acres in October the 2nd, 1902. And one of the things that they were responsible for was donating land for the first church within in the Stop 6 community. And they also was responsible for working on creating a school within the Stop Six community, the Cowanville community, for African American kids, and it operated out of the Cowan Macmillan United Methodist Church that was in that area. William D. and Ellie Burns built. They were involved in that Stop Six community, but they also built their house, which was a two-story house, in 1915, and they operated a restaurant, and they operated. They got approval from the county to set up the water system that served the Cowanville community. Now, the Burns was, and that's a picture of the Burns family, and they were kind of an interesting family because they were able to function anywhere in the city of Fort Worth as whites, but they let you know very early and clearly that they were black, and they were proud of being black citizens. But they were a good family. And in fact, one of my youth directors in my church was one of their sons, and he was an incredible individual to work with. Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church was the first was founded in 1878. They were founded on I mentioned Washington, who owned 115 acres, but they were actually organized on at his farm in 1878. And the church then purchased 2 acres in Handley on the Arkansas Trail, and 1 acre was utilized as a church, and the other acre was used for the cemetery. The church building was leased by Tarrant County as a school for colored children, and the church later moved to the Cowanville community in 2 locations until it located where it's located right now on Amanda and Dunbar Street, and that was in 1944 and 1945. There was a couple of other churches that was formed. The Cowan Macmillan United Methodist Church. We've talked a little bit about that, and the Cowans itself, that they were key involved in setting that up. There was a couple of other churches, and that was St. James AME Church, and that's located within the community. It was organized in 1908. And the Dansbys, Walter Dansby, many people know Walter, the first black superintendent of the Fort Worth ISD. His family played a major role in the founding of that church. And then the next one was Mayfield Missionary Baptist Church, that was organized in 1911. And we're still doing additional information on that. I'd like to kind of flip back to Cowan Macmillan United Methodist Church, in that the church was formed in 1898. The first 1889 is when it was formed. Amanda Davis bought her land quite a few years later, but one of the things, and then of course Mr. Cowan came in 1902, and one of the things that we've been wrestling with right now is trying to determine where did the people come from that formed the Methodist Church. Methodist churches were very active in doing things in African American communities, but the fact is there was either they were tenant farmers or something in that area that formed that church, because we have not been able to locate the individuals that founded Cowan Macmillan Church. So that's one of the research projects that we're working on. Now, what happened is the settlers came into the Stop Six community and they settled, the black settlers. We formed churches. And like everywhere else, the church became kind of the center point for establishing schools within the area. Let's see. So the first school in the area was organized in the Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church's building that they had purchased in 1887. So the first school was called Prairie Chapel, and that was the Ebenezer Church that was set on the prairie, and they called it a little chapel, and so that's where it was held. Ebenezer Church building on Hanley Hill was rented for the school sometime between 1888 and 1889. The school moved to Cowanville around 1907, and basically it located in the Macmillan Church, and Alonzo Cowan was he and his wife was real responsible for bringing the school to that area. In 1907, the Rushville School operated out of the Cowan United Methodist Church, out of there. It operated out of the church itself. And then the Sagamore Hill School for colored children, and the boundaries for the school district changed, and Sagamore Hill School District took over the school for the colored children in 1909 to 1924. The school moved to a house on Langston Street, and this was behind Cowan Macmillan United Methodist Church, and the property was purchased in 1921. In the Sagamore Hill, Rushville School was constructed in 1924 and 1925. They had a bond election, but before they actually completed the construction of the school, the Fort Worth Independent School District took over the school itself. The first principal, she wasn't the first principal, but she was the first principal under the Fort Worth ISD that took over the school in 1925, and Miss Mardai Logan was named the principal in 1934. The name of the school was changed to Dunbar in 1938. The other school that was in the area was Sunrise School, was organized in 1936, and Mary Macmillan was the first principal and teacher at the school. The school was initially located at 5400 in the 5400 block of Cotty Street. And I'm going to tell you something that was really interesting about Miss Macmillan. She had an old Model T Ford, and if anything happened at the school that day, the kids was assured that she was going to be at their house that afternoon. And she had a rumble seat in the old car, and when I was in school, she was one of my principals. And when we were in the school, we used to go places with her in the rumble seat that she had on the back of the car. So it was kind of an interesting experience. Now, one of the real significant things is that many of the first black elected officials and other leaders came out of the Stop Six community because it was expanding, the boundaries was expanding. And some of the people the elected official that came out of that area was Dr. Edwin Gwynn, who was the first black city council member, Reba Carey, who was the first board member of the Fort Worth ISD and a state representative, Charles Griffin, the first black justice of the peace, Walter Barber, she served on the city council, Bert Williams, Eugene McCrae, they served on the school, on the city council, Marty Logan, Marjorie Walden, she served on the Fort Worth ISD, and she was a principal. She was a principal of one of the schools within the area, Christine Moss, Gwendolyn Morrison, and of course Judge Clifford Davis is here. Garfield Thomas, Sidney Thomas, who was Justice of the Peace, of course Garfield Thomas, state representative and an active community leader. Wheatfall, who was city council. Dr. Harold Odom, who served on Tarrant County College board. McKinley Jackson, city council. Gina Bivens. And then there's many, many, many more that have been involved. So a lot of the major leadership has come out of there. And the Stop Six community itself, and we've gone through a planning session, is divided into the Cowansville, which was an initial area, Edgewood Terrace, and Edgewood Terrace was another area within Stop Six where we had a lot of teachers and other professional people moved into that particular area. Then during the black soldiers coming back from the war in 1945, you had a development that was created called Hollywood Hills, which was small houses, but it was made available to returning veterans. Sunrise, which is another area that, even though it was located out close to Cowanville, and Stop Six pretty much covered that overall area, but we need to do a significant amount of research on that one. The Cabell Place apartments, and you hear a lot about the Cabell Place apartments being demolished, but that was a new development that came to the Stop Six area in about 1951, 52. Rosedale Park apartments, and those were apartments that was built out in the Stop Six area when blacks were limited in where they could stay, but it did attract a lot of professional people that eventually moved into the Carver Heights community, which is the next. And then there was a Parkside, which was another very interesting area that was all-white community that was located out in that area, but separated from the Stop Six community. You almost had to go around in order to get into it, but eventually it became an all-black community. Sandy Acres was more of a rural area that was out southeast of the Stop Six area, and then Rosedale Park Addition. Those are some of the areas out there, and that's kind of the end of the presentation. But one of the things that I was mentioned earlier, that we talked about the center itself. And the center itself was just a tool in order to bring this information and get the young people involved and aware of the significance of that overall community where they lived. We had been talking about it, but we were able to pull it together. The history of the Stop Six community is very, very critical, because a lot of things that you read and you hear about the Stop Six community is all negative. But when you really get into really getting a clear understanding of the Stop Six community. You look at the South Side, how the South Side developed with a lot of the black leadership. But the same thing took place when blacks were becoming, a larger number of blacks becoming professional, involved in areas, but they were restricted on where they could live. They were forced to live within the overall Stop Six community, Carver Heights, Rosedale Park, Addition, Edgewood Terrace. These are areas where a lot of black professionals moved, and that's where a lot of the leadership came from. I tell you what, we're at a point, and I don't want to extend it over, but there may be questions that you may have about the Stop Six community. So I'd like to go ahead and talk a little bit about that and answer some of your questions.